My father spent 28 years calling me the affair child. He loved to tell his elite friends that my skin was too flawless and my features were too pretty to belong to his bloodline. He tortured my mother over her supposed infidelity and paraded my sister around as his only true heir. So I took a DNA test to finally throw the truth in his arrogant face. But the results did not just prove I was not his daughter. They proved I was not my mother's daughter either. We flew to the hospital where I was born, and what the head nurse confessed made my billionaire father collapse on the floor. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who underestimated your worth. The crystal chandeliers of the Atlanta Biltmore estate cast a blinding light over Marcus Sterling's 60th birthday gala. The room was packed with the city's African-American elite, from politicians to real estate tycoons, all dressed in custom couture and sipping imported champagne. I sat at the center table, wearing a tailored emerald suit that perfectly masked the racing of my heart. I am Zuri Sterling, 28 years old, and the CEO of a corporate crisis management firm. I make my living cleaning up the catastrophic messes of the ultra-rich. But tonight I was here to detonate a bomb in my own family. My father stood at the head of the table. Marcus was a man who demanded worship. He built his real estate empire with a ruthless grip and ruled our family exactly the same way. He tapped his spoon against his crystal flute. The low hum of networking and jazz music immediately died down. Everyone turned their attention to the patriarch, expecting a boastful speech about his wealth or another lecture on the Sterling legacy. Instead, his cold eyes locked directly onto me. I am transferring the entire Sterling trust to my true daughter Nia and her husband Preston, he announced, his voice booming through the silent ballroom. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo, pulled out a folded check, and tossed it across the table. It landed right next to my dinner plate. Zuri, here is a $10,000 check. Take it and leave. I am done funding my wife's bastard. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. I could feel hundreds of eyes burning into me, feeding on the public humiliation. This was his signature move. I remembered being 16 years old, standing in the freezing rain after Marcus locked me out of the house. My crime back then was refusing to chemically straighten my natural hair for a country club photo shoot. He had called me a street urchin, while my mother Camille simply stood behind the living room curtains watching me shiver. Across the table, my younger sister Nia let out a sharp, cruel laugh. At 25, she was the undisputed golden child, perfectly molded to Marcus' expectations. She leaned heavily against her husband, Preston Kensington. Preston was a white man from a supposedly prestigious old money family, though my professional background checks told a very different story about his sinking hedge fund. Preston smirked and took a slow sip of his bourbon. "You really should take the check." "Zuri," Preston sneered, his voice dripping with unearned arrogance. $10,000 is a lot of money for someone in your position. You could use it to buy a decent therapist to get over your daddy issues. Or maybe open a little nail salon in a bad neighborhood. That is where your genetics belong anyway, right? Nia giggled loudly, resting her head on his shoulder. "Just go, Zuri," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "You are ruining Dad's perfect night. You never belonged at this table anyway." My mother Camille sat completely frozen beside Marcus. She stared down at her untouched plate, her diamond necklace sparkling as her chest heaved with panicked breaths. She had endured decades of emotional abuse from Marcus, always accepting his accusations of infidelity just to maintain her social status and unlimited credit cards. She would not defend me now. She never had. I did not cry. I did not yell. I simply smiled and let the heavy silence stretch until the tension in the room became physically unbearable. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out a thick manila envelope sealed with the red wax stamp of Atlanta's most rigorous private genetics laboratory. I tossed it across the marble table. It slid perfectly, stopping right over the $10,000 check. "You have called me the child of a lie for 28 years, Marcus," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal authority that echoed to the back of the room. "You told everyone who would listen that my mother slept around. so I decided to do your job for you. I hired a private investigator to retrieve a sample of your hair and a sample of my mother's hair. I had them run a full panel against my own DNA. Marcus scoffed, crossing his arms. I do not need a piece of paper to tell me what I already know. You are not my daughter. You are absolutely right, I replied, keeping my gaze locked on his. I am 0% sterling. There is not a single drop of your arrogant blood in my veins. A murmur spread through the wealthy crowd, but I raised my hand, silencing them instantly. The results brought up a fascinating plot twist. I continued, stepping away from my chair. I rested my hands lightly on her trembling shoulders. I am not your daughter, but I am also 0% a match to Camille. My mother dropped her beautiful wine glass down onto the floor. The crystal shattered against the floor, sending shards flying. The ballroom froze. Marcus lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the dining table. His knuckles turned white against the dark marble. He looked from the results to Camille, his face contorting into pure rage. For 28 years, he had accused her of sleeping with a business rival. Now the paper proved she had not, but it also proved the child she raised was not hers. He slammed his fist down, making the silver rattle. Who is she? Marcus roared. What did you do, Camille? Where did this child come from? Camille stepped back, her hands flying to her mouth in panic. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her makeup. I do not know, she sobbed, her voice cracking. I swear to you, Marcus, I do not know. I gave birth to a girl. I held her. I never let her out of my sight. She was looking at me like I was a ghost. The woman who spent my entire life telling me I was a mistake was staring at me in absolute terror. Nia grabbed her mother's arm, pulling her back as if my lack of sterling blood was contagious. This is out of line, Preston announced, stepping in front of Nia. He puffed out his chest, adjusting his tailored suit jacket. As a Kensington, I know about handling delicate family matters. You are causing a massive scene in front of Atlanta's most influential people, Zuri. Gather your things and leave this property immediately before I have security throw you out. I turned my gaze to my golden brother-in-law, the white knight of the family who always looked down his nose at me. I took a slow step toward him. You want to talk about security, Preston? How about we talk about the financial security at the Piedmont Country Club? His confident posture faltered instantly. His eyes darted nervously toward Marcus. I kept my voice loud enough for the wealthy guests to hear. My crisis management firm gets alerts about a lot of interesting things, like how your platinum card was declined 3 times at the club yesterday over a lunch tab. I stepped closer, locking eyes with his. Your family hedge fund has been bleeding cash for 2 years. You only married my sister because you desperately needed Marcus to bail you out of bankruptcy. So do not try to use your old money authority on me when you cannot even afford a basic salad. Preston turned white and clamped his mouth shut. Nia looked at him in shock, dropping his arm. I turned back to the man who spent my existence making me feel like garbage. Marcus stared at Preston with dangerous suspicion, but I gave him no time to process the betrayal. Listen to me carefully, Marcus, I said, tapping the manila envelope. You are calling your pilots right now. Get the private jet fueled and ready in exactly 1 hour. We are flying to Washington, D.C. tonight. We are going to Memorial Hospital where I was born and finding out exactly how a baby swap happened in an elite maternity ward. Marcus sneered. I am not taking orders from you. You have 0 leverage. I smiled. It was the cold smile I used when tearing apart corrupt CEOs. I have every piece of leverage, I replied calmly. You are currently negotiating a massive merger. If the board finds out your wife was involved in a black market baby ring, your stock plummets by morning. I leaned in close. I also know about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, used to funnel money away from the IRS. My firm specializes in finding dirty money. If you do not have that plane ready in 60 minutes, I am sending the entire dossier to the Wall Street Journal. Marcus stood completely paralyzed. The arrogant billionaire was trapped. Get the car ready now, he barked. We are going to the airport. The tension inside the Gulfstream jet cabin was suffocating. Marcus sat by the window aggressively drinking scotch. Camille curled into a tight ball, crying silently into a cashmere blanket. Nia sat as far away from Preston as possible. The Golden family was fracturing right before my eyes. I sat alone watching the storm clouds roll past the window. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had blown up my entire life tonight. I had no idea who I was or where I came from. I only knew I was not the affair child. I was a stolen child. Just as the seatbelt sign chimed, my phone vibrated in my lap. It was a secure text message from my private investigator. I had tasked him with breaching the hospital digital archives the moment I dropped the DNA bomb. I opened the message. I got into the hospital mainframe. The physical records for the maternity wing were sealed permanently. I pulled the digital authorization log instead. You will not believe who signed the non-disclosure agreement and ordered the file locked forever. My thumb hovered over the screen. I typed back instantly. Give me the name. The response came 3 seconds later. My blood ran cold as I read the name on the screen. I locked my phone screen, hiding the name of the person who had sealed the hospital records. That single signature was a loaded gun, but I needed to wait for the perfect moment to pull the trigger. Right now, I had an arrogant distraction sitting across the aisle. The interior of the Gulfstream jet was dead silent, except for the low hum of the engines. Preston Kensington swirled the amber liquid in his crystal glass. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket and let out a long, exasperated sigh. You know, Zuri, this little theatrics display of yours is getting incredibly tiresome, Preston began. His voice carried that distinct boarding school drawl that he used whenever he wanted to remind people he considered them inferior. My family has held wealth in this country for 5 generations. We are an institution. We do not throw tantrums over dinner. We do not drag our in-laws onto impromptu midnight flights just to satisfy some bizarre temper tantrum. You are a glitch in this family system. You always have been. You are a stray dog barking at the gates of an estate you could never afford to buy. You should have taken the $10,000 and walked away with whatever scrap of dignity you had left. I did not blink. I let him finish his little speech, savoring the absolute delusion of his confidence. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, and gave him a smile that made the temperature in the cabin drop. Generational wealth. I repeated, letting the words roll around my mouth like a bad joke. Is that what you call the $85 million deficit your father is currently hiding from the Securities and Exchange Commission? Preston froze. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a ghost. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Or maybe, I continued, my voice deadly calm, you are referring to the Kensington estate in the Hamptons. The one that was quietly leveraged to the absolute maximum 3 months ago just to cover your catastrophic losses in the crypto market. You transferred $20 million into a shell company in the Bahamas, hoping to mask the bleed, but my analysts tracked the wire transfers in about 45 minutes. You guys are drowning, Preston. Your generational wealth dried up before you even graduated from college. You are living on credit and borrowed time. Nia slammed her hand against the armrest, her eyes wide with fury. Shut your mouth, Zuri, she shrieked. You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of me and Preston. You are a bitter, lonely orphan who cannot stand that I married into an aristocratic family while you have absolutely no one. Preston is 10 times the man you will ever interact with. I turned my gaze to my sister, feeling nothing but pity for her absolute blindness. He does not love you, Nia. He loves your father's real estate empire. He loves the Sterling Trust Fund. He is a parasite looking for a host, and he found the perfect gullible target in you. The only reason he is sitting on this plane right now is to figure out how much of your inheritance he can bleed dry before the banks come to seize his assets. He is using you to plug the holes in his sinking ship. Marcus had been staring blankly at the DNA results for the entire flight, completely detached from our conversation. The shock of my mother supposedly giving birth to a stranger had broken his brain. But the mention of his real estate empire being used as a piggy bank snapped him back to reality. The predator in him woke up. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes narrowed as they locked onto Preston. Marcus was a monster, but he was a highly protective monster when it came to his money. Preston Marcus said, his voice dangerously low and thick with menace. What exactly is she talking about? Are you heavily leveraged? Preston stammered, gripping his glass so hard his knuckles turned white. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Marcus, do not listen to her. She is just throwing out wild accusations to distract us from the fact that she is not even your daughter. It is complete nonsense. The Kensington portfolio is as solid as it has ever been. But the seed was planted. Marcus did not look away. The tight, unbreakable alliance between the golden daughter, her aristocratic husband, and the ruthless patriarch was showing its first major fracture. Nia looked nervously between her father and her husband, her perfect illusion of a life suddenly wobbling on its pedestal. I sat back and watched the poison work its way through their system. The untouchable Sterling family was tearing itself apart from the inside out. The jet touched down in Washington, D.C. with a heavy thud. We disembarked in complete silence. The black luxury SUVs were waiting on the tarmac to take us directly to Memorial Hospital. The ride through the city streets felt like a funeral procession. Camille continued to weep silently into her hands trembling in the corner of the vehicle. Marcus stared out the window, his jaw clenched tight, his mind clearly racing between his stolen biological child and his potentially bankrupt son-in-law. Memorial Hospital was an imposing structure of glass and steel catering specifically to the political and financial elite. It was well past midnight, but the lobby was brightly lit and immaculate. As we walked through the sliding automatic doors, the sterile smell of antiseptic hit me. I led the way, marching straight toward the administrative wing, with my family trailing behind me like condemned prisoners walking to the gallows. We bypassed the main reception and headed straight for the heavy double doors leading to the basement archives. I knew exactly where I was going, thanks to the floor plans my investigator had forwarded to my phone, but we did not get far. 3 armed security guards stepped out of the shadows, physically blocking our path. They were massive men wearing tactical gear with their hands resting threateningly near their utility belts. "Halt right there!" the lead guard ordered, putting a massive hand up to stop my momentum. "This area is highly restricted. No unauthorized personnel beyond this point." Marcus pushed his way to the front, his billionaire ego flaring up in an instant. He was used to doors opening the moment he announced his name. "I am Marcus Sterling. My wife gave birth in this hospital 28 years ago. I demand access to the birth records from October 1998 immediately. Move out of my way before I have your jobs." The guard did not flinch. He looked at Marcus with utter indifference, completely unmoved by the threats. "I do not care if you are the President of the United States, sir. The archives from 1998 are strictly off-limits to everyone. You need to turn around and leave this building right now, or you will be escorted out in handcuffs." Preston shoved his way past me, his face flushed with indignation. He could not stand being spoken to like a commoner, especially in front of Nia and Marcus. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke suit and marched right up to the lead security guard, pointing a manicured finger at the man's chest. "You clearly have no idea who you are dealing with." Preston snapped, his voice echoing loudly in the cavernous lobby. "I am Preston Kensington of the Connecticut Kensingtons. My family has heavily endowed medical institutions across the entire eastern seaboard for 5 generations. We play golf with your board of directors. If you do not step aside and grant us access to those records right now, I will personally see to it that you are all standing in the unemployment line by sunrise." The 3 heavily armed guards simply stared at him. Then the lead guard, a massive man with a thick beard, let out a low, rumbling laugh. He looked at Preston like he was a toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. "Listen to me very carefully, Mr. Kensington," the guard said, stepping forward so his towering frame completely shadowed Preston. "I do not care who you play golf with. I do not care about your grandfather's bank account or your fancy last name. This facility operates under strict private privacy mandates. Old money does not give you the security clearance to breach sealed medical archives. So I am going to ask you politely one last time to step back before I physically remove you from the premises." Preston opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His face turned a deep mottled red. He looked back at Marcus, expecting the billionaire to step in and back up his authority, but Marcus just glared at him with absolute disgust. The so-called powerful white knight of the family had been completely neutralized by a single hospital security guard. Nia looked away, humiliated by her husband's utter lack of real influence. He had tried to play his aristocratic privilege card, and it had been rejected outright. I let out a soft sigh and stepped around Preston, gently brushing his shoulder as I passed. "Stand down, Preston," I said, my voice dead calm. "You are embarrassing yourself." I did not raise my voice or try to physically intimidate the guards. I simply opened my leather clutch and pulled out a single matte black business card. I slid it across the polished surface of the security desk. The lead guard glanced down at it, his expression hardening into skepticism. "I do not care what kind of business you run, lady," the guard started to say, but I cut him off by holding up one finger. I pulled out my phone and dialed a private number I knew by heart. I put the call on speaker and set it on the desk right next to my business card. The phone rang exactly twice before a frantic voice answered on the other end. "Yes, Miss Sterling," the voice chirped. "Get the CEO of Apex Health Holdings on the line." I commanded, my tone entirely conversational yet laced with lethal authority. Memorial Hospital is a subsidiary of Apex. 6 months ago, Apex defaulted on a massive bridge loan to the tune of $400 million. My crisis management firm quietly acquired that toxic debt portfolio through a proxy corporation. I currently own the financial markers that keep the lights on in this building. Call their chief executive and tell him that the person who holds the deed to his entire operation is currently being denied access at his front desk. Tell him I am giving him exactly 60 seconds to fix it before I call the loan due and force the hospital into immediate liquidation. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my bag. I looked up at the 3 security guards. The skepticism had completely vanished from their faces, replaced by an uncomfortable realization that they were standing in the way of a corporate wrecking ball. The silence in the lobby was deafening. Marcus stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and reluctant awe. He had spent his whole life crushing people with his wealth, but he was witnessing me execute a hostile takeover of a medical facility in under a minute without breaking a sweat. Exactly 50 seconds later, the elevator doors across the lobby dinged open. A balding man in a rumpled suit came sprinting out. He was sweating profusely, and his tie was crooked, clearly having just thrown his clothes on in a sheer panic. He raced across the marble floor, his dress shoes slipping slightly as he skidded to a halt in front of the security desk. "Miss Sterling?" The man gasped, bending over slightly to catch his breath. "I am Arthur Harrison, the chief hospital administrator. I received a call from the board just now. I am so incredibly sorry for this inconvenience. There has been a terrible misunderstanding." Preston, seeing an opportunity to salvage his bruised ego, immediately stepped forward again. "It is about time," Harrison Preston scoffed, puffing out his chest. "Do you realize how utterly disrespectful your staff has been to my family? I want these guards reprimanded immediately, and I want—" Mr. Harrison did not even let Preston finish his sentence. The administrator physically brushed past Preston, completely ignoring him, and bowed his head slightly toward me. Preston stood there, his mouth hanging open, utterly destroyed. His generational wealth and societal status were absolutely useless against the raw, self-made corporate power I wielded. I owned the ground they were standing on, and Harrison knew it. "The guards will remain at their posts," I told Harrison, keeping my eyes locked on his terrified face. They were doing their jobs. "You, however, are going to take me to the basement archives right now. I need the maternity ward transfer files from October 1998, specifically anything related to Camille Sterling." Harrison swallowed hard. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly under the fluorescent lights. He pulled a master keycard from his pocket, his hands trembling violently. "Of course, Miss Sterling," he stammered. "Please follow me." He led our silent group past the security desk and toward a restricted elevator bank. The doors closed and we descended deep into the bowels of the hospital. The polished marble and bright lights of the main lobby quickly gave way to exposed concrete and flickering halogen bulbs. The air grew cold and smelled of dust and old paper. We walked down a long, narrow corridor until we reached a massive steel vault door that looked like it belonged in a bank rather than a hospital. Harrison stopped in front of the heavy biometric scanner. He turned back to face me, his eyes darting nervously toward Marcus and Camille. He clutched his keycard to his chest, looking like a man about to open the gates of hell. "I will grant you unrestricted access to the room," Miss Sterling Harrison said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "But I must warn you about what you are going to find. The file you are looking for is not a standard transfer log. It has a black level clearance. That designation is only used when the hospital needs to legally bury an incident. That specific file was sealed permanently to cover up a fatality." The heavy metal door groaned as the hospital administrator pushed it open. The air inside the basement archive was stale and smelled heavily of decaying paper and buried secrets. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across endless rows of gray filing cabinets. I led the way down the narrow aisle, my heels clicking sharply against the bare concrete floor. At the very back of the room, sitting under the harsh glare of a single naked bulb, was a massive iron safe. It looked like a bank vault, completely out of place in a medical records room. The administrator wiped a fresh layer of sweat from his forehead. His hands shook violently as he reached for the combination dial. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the heavy breathing of my supposed family and the sharp clicks of the safe tumbler. The heavy bolts disengaged with a loud, echoing thud. The administrator pulled the thick iron door open and reached deep into the dark interior. He pulled out a single oversized manila envelope. The edges were yellowed and brittle with age. A thick red stamp was pressed aggressively across the front, reading "Black Level Restricted." Right beneath that stamp in faded black ink was the label "October 1998, Sterling Unknown." He held it out toward me, his eyes darting nervously toward Marcus. He knew exactly what kind of destructive power he was holding in his hands. Marcus did not give me the chance to take it. The billionaire patriarch lunged forward and ripped the file right out of the administrator's trembling hands. He tore the top of the envelope open so violently that the thick paper ripped in half. Several documents spilled out, fluttering toward the dusty concrete floor. Marcus caught a stack of medical transfer forms and began reading. He was desperate to prove me wrong, desperate to maintain the narrative he had used to terrorize my mother for almost 3 decades. His eyes scanned the typewritten lines. I watched the exact moment his reality completely shattered. The arrogant color drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very old. "This is a lie," Marcus muttered, his voice tight and breathless. "This is a fabricated lie." I stepped closer, locking my eyes onto his panicked face. "Read it, Marcus." I commanded, my voice carrying the lethal calm I used in corporate war rooms. "Read exactly what your money bought in this hospital." He glared at me with pure hatred, then looked back down at the paper. His hands were visibly shaking. His voice cracked as he read the clinical typewritten text aloud. "Patient Camille Sterling delivered a female infant at 2:14 in the morning. Infant presented with critical genetic abnormalities. At 4:30 in the morning, a healthy female infant, Jane Doe, from an anonymous intake was transferred into the Sterling private suite. The biological Sterling infant was immediately transferred to the State Ward facility under an anonymous listing." The papers slipped from Marcus' fingers and scattered across the floor. He turned toward Camille, his eyes burning with a sudden, unrestrained fury. The man who had controlled every aspect of his life had just discovered he was the victim of a massive, unimaginable deception, and he instantly sought his favorite target. He closed the distance between them in 2 massive strides and grabbed Camille violently by the shoulders. "What did you do?" he screamed, shaking her so hard her head snapped back. "You paid them to swap my child, Camille. You brought a street rat into my home and threw my real daughter into a state facility. You disgusting, lying coward." Camille let out a sound that I had never heard before. It was not a cry. It was a guttural, agonizing scream of a woman whose soul had just been ripped entirely out of her body. She collapsed, tearing herself out of Marcus' grip and dropping heavily to the dirty concrete floor. "No!" she shrieked, clutching her stomach as if she had just been physically gutted. "No, Marcus, no. I was sedated. They gave me drugs. I woke up and they put a beautiful, healthy baby girl in my arms and told me she was mine. They told me she was ours. She rocked back and forth on the ground, sobbing hysterically. I never knew, she wailed, hitting the floor with her fists. They stole my baby. They took my baby while I slept. Marcus stood over her. His fists clenched his chest, heaving with ragged breaths. He looked ready to tear the room apart. Nia backed away, pressing herself against the metal filing cabinets, utterly terrified of the violence erupting in front of her. Preston was completely silent, his earlier aristocratic arrogance entirely erased by the magnitude of the scandal unfolding in this dark room. I ignored the chaos. I ignored my mother's agonizing cries and my father's blind rage. I knelt down on the cold concrete and calmly picked up the transfer authorization form that Marcus had dropped. I smoothed out the wrinkled edges and looked at the bottom of the page. There, on the final line, was the required signature for the illegal transfer. The hospital needed a family member to authorize the swap, to sign away a sick biological child, and purchase a healthy anonymous replacement. I stood up and walked right into the middle of my parents' violent confrontation. "Stop screaming at her, Marcus," I said, my voice slicing through the noise like a razor blade. I held the document up right in front of his face. I tapped my finger against the ink signature at the bottom of the page. "You are blaming the wrong woman." Marcus stopped breathing. He stared at the signature. It was not Camille's neat, elegant cursive. It was a bold, aggressive scrawl that dominated the page. A signature that struck terror into the hearts of everyone in the Atlanta business district. "You always told me I was the result of a betrayal, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level while watching his world burn down. "You tortured Camille for 28 years because you thought she betrayed your bloodline. But the person who betrayed you, the person who stole your real child and bought me to cover it up, was not your wife." I shoved the paper directly into his chest, forcing him to take it. "Look at the signature, Marcus. It belongs to Josephine Sterling, your own mother. The ruthless, untouchable matriarch of your entire dynasty signed away your biological child to die in a state ward just to protect the flawless Sterling family image." The paper shook violently in his hands. Marcus stared at the bold ink strokes as if the document itself had bitten him. He staggered backward, hitting the edge of a filing cabinet. The air in the archive room grew suffocatingly dense. He shook his head, his eyes darting frantically between the signature and my face. "That is impossible!" Marcus gasped, his voice devoid of its usual booming authority. "My mother would never do this. She is the one who built the Sterling legacy. She spent her entire life preaching about bloodline purity. She vetted every person who married into this family. She would never bring an outsider into our home." I crossed my arms and watched the great Marcus Sterling crumble. Bloodline purity. I repeated, my tone dripping with absolute disdain. "That is exactly why she did it, Marcus. Your biological daughter was born with severe genetic abnormalities. She was sick, she was flawed, and in Josephine Sterling's perfect world, there is absolutely no room for flaws. A sick heir would have been a PR nightmare. It would have meant years of hospital visits, whispered rumors of genetic weakness, and public pity. Josephine did not want a disabled granddaughter tarnishing the Sterling dynasty. So she paid someone to throw your real child away and bought a healthy anonymous replacement to preserve the illusion. She bought me." Marcus looked at Camille, who was still weeping on the floor, clutching her stomach. He looked at the hospital administrator, who was staring at his shoes, terrified to make eye contact. The reality was setting in, but the billionaire ego was fighting it tooth and nail. "It is a forgery," Marcus insisted, desperately, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You orchestrated this, Zuri. You paid someone to mock up these documents." "Take your phone out, Marcus," I ordered, ignoring his pathetic accusation. "Take your phone out and call her right now. Put her on speaker." He did not move. He just stood there, clutching the paper, breathing heavily. I took a step closer, invading his personal space. "I am a crisis manager, Marcus. I know exactly how federal investigations work. If you do not call your mother and get her down here right this second, I am walking out of this basement and handing this entire file over to the FBI." We are not talking about a simple medical malpractice suit. We are talking about human trafficking. We are talking about the illegal purchase of an infant, the falsification of federal birth records, and the abandonment of a medically fragile child to a state ward. The second this hits a federal desk, your mother will be indicted. She will spend the last years of her life rotting in a federal penitentiary, and your company's stock will flatline before the opening bell. Marcus swallowed hard. His face was gray. The threat of losing his fortune and his freedom finally overpowered his denial. With shaking hands, he pulled his phone from his tailored jacket and dialed. The line rang loudly in the cavernous concrete room. Nia suddenly stepped out of the shadows. The pristine golden child was unraveling. Her perfect blowout was a mess, and her designer makeup was smudged. The realization of what this scandal would do to her social standing was hitting her with the force of a freight train. She practically lunged at me, grabbing my forearm with desperate clawing fingers. "Zuri, you cannot do this!" Nia pleaded, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Think about what you are saying. If this gets out, the Sterling name is destroyed. We will be ruined. My friends, the country club, the charity boards, they will never look at us the same way. The press will feast on us." I looked down at her manicured hand gripping my arm. I did not move. I just stared at it until she nervously pulled it away. "You are asking me to protect the reputation of a family that spent 28 years treating me like garbage," I said, my voice cold and hollow. "You stood by and watched your father call me a mistake every single day of my life. You paraded around as the perfect heir while I was banished to the shadows. And now you want me to protect you." "I will pay you," Nia blurted out, the desperation making her sloppy. "I have my own trust fund. I can give you $5 million, $10 million. Whatever you want, Zuri. Just take the money and burn that file. We can walk away from this and pretend it never happened. You can start your own firm in Europe. You never have to see us again." I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. I looked over at Preston, who was standing silently in the corner, watching his wife try to bargain away the very fortune he was planning to steal. "Keep your money, Nia," I said, stepping past her. "You are going to need every single penny of it when Preston finally admits he is completely bankrupt and tries to liquidate your assets to cover his crypto losses. You are offering me money you do not even realize is already gone." Nia gasped, spinning around to look at Preston. He immediately looked away, refusing to meet her eyes. The golden couple was officially shattered. At that exact moment, the heavy metal doors at the end of the archive corridor creaked open. The rhythmic squeak of rubber wheels echoed against the concrete walls. Every single person in the room froze. We turned toward the sound, watching as 3 men in sharp black suits stepped into the dim light. They were high-priced corporate fixers, the kind of men who made criminal charges disappear before dawn. But they were just the escort. Rolling forward in a motorized leather wheelchair was Josephine Sterling. She was 82 years old, but she sat perfectly upright, radiating an aura of pure, toxic arrogance. She wore a pristine white Chanel suit and her signature string of South Sea pearls. Her face was a map of harsh lines and ruthless decisions. She did not look like a woman who had just been caught committing a federal crime. She looked like a queen surveying peasants who had dared to step onto her property. Josephine did not look at Camille, who was still sobbing on the floor. She did not look at Marcus, who was staring at her with profound horror. She did not even acknowledge her precious golden granddaughter, Nia. Instead, Josephine drove her wheelchair right up to me, stopping mere inches away. Her cold, pale eyes locked onto mine, filled with an intensity that had terrified boardrooms for decades. She looked me up and down, taking in my confident posture and the damning file clutched in my hand. Her lips curled into a vicious sneer, revealing teeth that looked far too sharp for an old woman. "I should have left you in the trash where you belonged." The echo of her words bounced off the concrete walls of the basement archive. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I held my ground against the woman who had played God with my life. The camera would capture this moment, perfectly circling us in a slow, deliberate arc, highlighting the shifting power dynamic in the room. On one side, the aging architect of a decades-long lie. On the other, the consequence of that lie, standing tall and unbothered. Marcus found his voice first. He stepped forward, his massive frame practically trembling. Mother, he choked out the word sounding completely foreign, coming from the ruthless billionaire. Tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not forge my signature and give away my biological child. Josephine Sterling did not even look at him. She kept her icy gaze fixed entirely on me. Her posture remained flawless, her spine ramrod straight against the leather backing of her wheelchair. I did what was necessary, Marcus. She stated, her voice dripping with unapologetic pride. You were young and foolish. You did not understand the absolute fragility of the Sterling legacy. We are not just a family. We are an institution. We hold a position of absolute power in this country, and power demands perfection. Camille let out a strangled gasp, pulling herself up from the floor. You stole my baby! She screamed, her voice tearing at the seams. You took my flesh and blood from my arms and replaced her with a stranger. How could you do that to a mother? Josephine finally turned her head, casting a look of pure disgust toward Camille. Oh, do stop your incessant whining, Camille. You were a fragile, weak incubator who could not even perform your one primary duty to this family. You produced a defective heir. The child was riddled with genetic abnormalities. Do you have any idea what high society would have done to us? The media would have feasted on the Sterling bloodline. The whispers, the pity, the endless hospital visits. It would have shown weakness. I protected this family from a lifetime of embarrassment. I secured a healthy anonymous infant to seamlessly take her place so you could play house, and Marcus could focus on building the empire. I saved you both. Her absolute lack of remorse was staggering. Marcus looked like he had been struck by lightning. Nia covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror as she realized her beloved grandmother was a monster. Preston remained pinned to the wall, calculating how this massive scandal would affect his own precarious financial survival. I took a slow, deliberate step toward the wheelchair. You talk about protecting your legacy, Josephine, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You talk about bloodline purity and avoiding embarrassment. But look at what your pristine legacy has become. Your son is a tyrant whose empire is currently resting in the palm of my hand. Your golden granddaughter is married to a bankrupt fraud who is actively bleeding your trust funds dry. And the flawless replacement child you bought to save face is standing right in front of you holding the exact documents that will send you to a federal penitentiary. The air in the room grew suffocatingly tight. Josephine Sterling had spent her entire 82 years surrounded by people who bowed to her every command. She was not accustomed to defiance, and she was certainly not accustomed to being spoken to with such absolute disrespect by someone she considered garbage. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. You insolent, worthless mutt, she spat, her composure completely shattering. With a sudden burst of violent energy, she raised her heavy silver-handled cane and swung it directly at my face. It was a vicious, calculated strike aimed to punish and humiliate. But I was not the terrified, helpless victim she expected. My reflexes were faster. I reached up and caught the thick wooden shaft of the cane mid-air. The impact stung my palm, but I did not let go. I wrenched it forward, stopping the silver handle mere inches from her nose. Her security men flinched, but a sharp look from me kept them firmly in their places. They knew I held the deed to the hospital and the evidence of a federal crime. They were not going to risk their own freedom for an old woman about to go down in flames. I leaned in close, so close I could smell the sharp scent of her expensive perfume mixed with the metallic tang of fear she was desperately trying to hide. You do not own me anymore, old woman, I said, my voice cold as ice. You never did. You thought you could throw away human lives like defective merchandise and just buy replacements. But your little purchase grew up and learned how to dismantle empires. Start talking. I want to know exactly what you did with the child you stole. Josephine tugged at her cane, but my grip was like iron. She let go of the handle, her chest heaving as she quickly recalculated her strategy. The physical intimidation had failed miserably. The verbal abuse had bounced right off me. She needed a new angle. She adjusted her pristine white jacket and gave a subtle, sharp nod to the lead lawyer standing slightly behind her right shoulder. The man stepped forward instantly. He reached inside his tailored suit jacket and withdrew a leather-bound checkbook. He clicked a gold fountain pen and began writing, resting the book on his briefcase. Josephine watched me, her eyes narrowing with calculating precision. "Everyone has a price," she said, her tone shifting back to that smooth, aristocratic drawl. "You have proven yourself to be resourceful, I will give you that. But you are still an outsider looking for a payday. So let us end this tedious little drama right now." The lawyer finished writing and tore the check from the book. He handed it to Josephine, who held it out toward me between two manicured fingers. $5 million, Josephine announced. The amount echoed in the dusty archive room. It was enough money to completely vanish, to start a new life anywhere in the world and never look back. "Take this," she commanded. "You will leave this hospital tonight. You will legally change your name. You will move to Europe or Asia or wherever people of your class go when they strike it rich. You will hand over those original documents, and you will never contact Marcus Camille or anyone in my family ever again. You will disappear. You are a stain on my family, and I am paying to have you permanently removed." I reached out and took the slip of paper. I looked down at the heavy black ink. $5 million written out in elegant cursive. Marcus watched me breathlessly. Nia let out a small sigh of relief, clearly hoping I would take the bribe and save her social standing. Preston looked like he was ready to tackle me for the money himself. I looked back up at Josephine. I held her arrogant gaze as I pinched the center of the check. With a sharp, swift motion, I ripped the paper in half. Then I stacked the pieces and ripped them again and again. I tore the $5 million bribe into tiny, worthless shreds of confetti. I opened my hand and let the pieces flutter down, dropping them directly onto her pristine Chanel lap. "Keep your dirty money," I told her, watching the absolute shock register on her face. "I am not leaving until I get the truth." Before Josephine could formulate a response, the heavy metal doors of the archive room groaned open once more. Heavy, hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor. Arthur Harrison, the hospital administrator, came rushing back into the dim light. He was completely out of breath, his face flushed and glistening with sweat. But he was not alone. Walking beside him, her arm linked tightly with his for physical support, was a frail, elderly woman. She wore a faded floral dress and a thick wool cardigan despite the humid summer night outside. She was trembling violently, her eyes wide with absolute terror, as she looked at the Sterling family gathered in the basement. Harrison stopped right next to me. He swallowed hard, gesturing to the woman clinging to his arm. "Miss Zuri," he said, his voice shaking. "This is Nurse Beatrice. She was the head nurse on duty that night. She wants to confess." The camera rapidly panned back and forth between us, capturing the exact moment the great billionaire realized he was nothing but a pawn in his mother's twisted game. Marcus staggered backward, hitting the edge of a gray metal filing cabinet. The thick authorization form shook violently in his hands. He stared at the bold, aggressive ink strokes, as if the document itself had suddenly caught fire. The air in the archive room grew suffocatingly dense. He shook his head, his eyes darting frantically between the undeniable signature and my unblinking face. "That is impossible," Marcus gasped, his voice completely devoid of its usual booming authority. "My mother would never do this. She is the one who built the Sterling legacy. She spent her entire life preaching about bloodline purity. She vetted every single person who even tried to marry into this family. She is obsessed with our heritage. She would never bring a total outsider into our home." I crossed my arms and watched his entire foundation crumble. "Bloodline purity." I repeated, my tone dripping with absolute disdain. "That is exactly why she did it, Marcus. Your biological daughter was born with severe genetic abnormalities. She was sick. She was flawed. And in Josephine Sterling's perfect aristocratic world, there is absolutely no room for flaws. A sick heir would have been a public relations nightmare. It would have meant years of hospital visits, whispered rumors of genetic weakness, and public pity from your wealthy peers. Josephine did not want a disabled granddaughter tarnishing the flawless Sterling dynasty, so she paid someone to throw your real child away and bought a healthy, anonymous replacement to preserve the grand illusion. She bought me. Marcus looked down at Camille, who was still weeping uncontrollably on the dirty concrete, clutching her empty stomach. He looked at the hospital administrator, who was staring at his shoes, terrified to make eye contact. The reality was setting in, but the massive billionaire ego was fighting it tooth and nail. "It is a forgery," Marcus insisted, desperately pointing a trembling finger at me. "You orchestrated this, Zuri. You paid someone to mock up these documents just to ruin us." "Take your phone out, Marcus," I ordered, ignoring his pathetic accusation. "Take your phone out and call her right now. Put her on speaker. Tell her to come down to this basement." He did not move. He just stood there, clutching the paper, breathing heavily like a trapped animal. I took a step closer, invading his personal space. "I am a crisis manager, Marcus. I know exactly how federal investigations work. If you do not call your mother and get her down here right this second, I am walking out of this hospital and handing this entire file over to the FBI. We are not talking about a simple medical malpractice suit. We are talking about human trafficking. We are talking about the illegal purchase of an infant, the falsification of federal birth records, and the abandonment of a medically fragile child to a state ward. The second this hits a federal desk, your mother will be indicted. She will spend the last years of her life rotting in a federal penitentiary, and your company's stock will flatline before the opening bell tomorrow morning." Marcus swallowed hard. His face was ash gray. The overwhelming threat of losing his fortune and his freedom finally overpowered his denial. With shaking hands, he pulled his phone from his tailored jacket pocket. Before he could dial, Nia suddenly stepped out of the shadows. The pristine golden child was completely unraveling. Her perfect blowout was a mess, and her expensive designer makeup was smudged from crying. The realization of what this scandal would do to her elite social standing was hitting her with the force of a freight train. She practically lunged at me, grabbing my forearm with desperate clawing fingers. "Zuri, you cannot do this," Nia pleaded, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "Think about what you are saying. If this gets out, the Sterling name is completely destroyed. We will be ruined. My friends, the country club, the charity boards, they will never look at us the same way. The press will feast on us. We will be a national joke." I looked down at her manicured hand gripping my arm. I did not move. I just stared at it until she nervously pulled it away. "You are asking me to protect the reputation of a family that spent 28 years treating me like absolute garbage," I said, my voice cold and hollow. "You stood by and watched your father call me a mistake every single day of my life. You paraded around as the perfect legitimate heir while I was banished to the shadows and treated like a disease. And now you want me to protect you." "I will pay you," Nia blurted out, the sheer desperation making her sloppy. "I have my own trust fund, Zuri. I can give you $5 million, $10 million, whatever you want. I will give you half of my entire inheritance. Just take the money and burn that file. We can walk away from this and pretend it never happened. You can start your own firm in Europe. You never have to see us again. Just please do not destroy my life." I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. I looked over at Preston, who was standing silently in the corner, watching his wife try to bargain away a fortune to save a burning house. "Keep your money, Nia," I said, stepping past her. "You are going to need every single penny of it when the reality of your perfect marriage finally sets in." Nia gasped, stepping backward as if I had physically struck her. She looked at Preston, but he immediately looked away, refusing to meet her eyes. The golden couple was officially shattered by their own toxic secrets. "Call her," I snapped, turning back to Marcus. Marcus dialed the number. The line rang loudly in the cavernous concrete room. He spoke briefly into the receiver, his voice trembling as he demanded his mother come to the archive room immediately. He did not give her details. He just told her it was a matter of life and death for the company. We waited in agonizing silence. The heavy rhythmic ticking of the wall clock echoed alongside Camille's quiet, ragged sobs. 10 minutes passed like an eternity. Then the heavy metal doors at the end of the archive corridor creaked open. The sharp, rhythmic squeak of rubber wheels echoed against the concrete walls. Every single person in the room froze. We turned toward the sound, watching as 3 men in sharp black suits stepped into the dim fluorescent light. They were high-priced corporate lawyers, the kind of men who made criminal charges disappear before dawn. But they were just the escort. Rolling forward in a motorized leather wheelchair was Josephine Sterling. She was 82 years old, but she sat perfectly upright, radiating an aura of pure toxic arrogance. She wore a pristine white Chanel suit and her signature string of South Sea pearls. Her face was a map of harsh lines and ruthless decisions. She did not look like a woman who had just been summoned to answer for a federal crime. She looked like a queen surveying peasants who had dared to step onto her property. Josephine did not look at Camille, who was still weeping on the floor. She did not look at Marcus, who was staring at her with profound horror. She did not even acknowledge her precious golden granddaughter, Nia, who was trembling by the filing cabinets. Instead, Josephine drove her wheelchair right up to me, stopping mere inches away. Her cold, pale eyes locked onto mine, filled with an intensity that had terrified boardrooms for decades. She looked me up and down, taking in my confident posture, and the damning file clutched firmly in my hand. Her lips curled into a vicious sneer, revealing a darkness that chilled the room. "I should have left you in the trash where you belonged." The camera lens tilts sharply, throwing the entire archive room into a severe Dutch angle. The slanted, chaotic framing perfectly mirrors the absolute collapse of Marcus Sterling's meticulously constructed reality. The cold fluorescent lights seem to flicker as the great billionaire stumbles backward. His broad shoulders sag, and the imposing, terrifying patriarch suddenly looks like a hollowed-out shell of a man. His entire life, a carefully guarded monument to his own massive ego, is violently crashing down around him in real time. Beside him, Camille lets out a sound that does not even seem human. It is a primal, gut-wrenching wail that echoes off the cold concrete walls and rattles the metal filing cabinets. She drops heavily to her knees, her hands reaching out and gripping the edges of Arthur Harrison's tailored trousers. "Where is she?" Camille screams, her voice tearing her throat raw. "Where is my real baby? What did you do to my daughter?" Nurse Beatrice begins to violently shake. The frail elderly woman clutches her faded wool cardigan tightly against her chest as heavy tears stream down her deeply wrinkled face. The massive, crushing burden of a 28-year-old sin is finally breaking the life out of her. "I am so sorry." Beatrice sobs, her voice a frail, terrified whisper that cuts through the heavy air. "Mrs. Sterling paid me. She paid me a fortune to make the problem go away permanently. She told me the child was a defect, a stain on your pristine family name. Josephine ordered me to remove the infant from the private maternity ward in the middle of the night, before anyone else could see her or ask any questions." Camille crawls forward across the dusty floor and grabs Beatrice by the wrists. Her eyes are wide and bloodshot, filled with a manic, desperate hope. "Where did you take her?" Camille begs, her voice completely shattered by years of misplaced guilt. "Please, just tell me where she is. I want to see my baby." Beatrice cannot meet Camille's pleading eyes. She looks down at the dirty concrete, her tears falling fast and splashing onto her shoes. "I took her to the state ward." Beatrice confesses, the words stumbling out of her trembling mouth like broken glass. "It was a poorly funded, overcrowded facility on the absolute poorest edge of the city. We registered her under a fake intake form. We named her Jane Doe, so she could never be traced back to the Sterling dynasty. She was so sick, Camille. Her lungs were failing, and her tiny heart was too weak to pump properly. That state facility did not have the pediatric specialists she needed. They did not have the money or the advanced equipment to give her the critical care she desperately deserved. Josephine made absolutely sure we chose a place that would not ask any questions and would not try to save her." Camille's breath hitches painfully in her chest. She rocks back and forth on the hard floor, clutching her stomach as if trying to physically protect a child that was stolen from her womb almost 3 decades ago. "Did she survive?" Camille asks, her voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. "Please tell me she survived." Beatrice shakes her head slowly, her face completely broken by decades of silent guilt. "No." Beatrice weeps, burying her face in her hands. "She lasted exactly 6 months. She died in the middle of the night in a rusted metal state crib surrounded by crying strangers. No one came to hold her. She died utterly alone. The words strike Marcus like a physical blow to the chest. The great patriarch stumbles backward, hitting the metal filing cabinet so hard the drawers rattle. The sheer horrifying magnitude of the truth washes over him, paralyzing his mind. For 28 long years he had played the role of the tragic wounded victim. He had convinced himself that his wife was a cheating traitor who had polluted his sacred bloodline. He had spent nearly 3 decades mentally and emotionally abusing Camille, breaking her spirit day by day, hour by hour, because he genuinely believed she had defiled his honor. He had spent his entire life torturing me, treating me like a worthless affair child, a walking, breathing reminder of a betrayal that never actually happened. And all along the real monster was sitting right next to him. Marcus slowly turns his heavy head to look at his mother. Josephine Sterling sits perfectly still in her motorized leather wheelchair, entirely unbothered by the horrific tragedy unfolding around her. She shows absolutely no remorse for signing the death warrant of her own flesh and blood. She only cares that her pristine high society reputation was successfully protected. Marcus stares at the woman he had idolized his entire life, the woman whose approval he had sought at the expense of his own soul. He finally realizes that he has spent 28 years destroying his innocent wife and torturing an innocent child just to protect a mother who would gladly throw her own sick granddaughter into an unfunded state orphanage to die. The aristocratic Sterling Empire is built entirely on the bones of a discarded infant. While Marcus grapples with the absolute destruction of his soul, Nia steps forward. Her reaction is not one of horror or grief or empathy. She does not reach out to comfort her mother who is sobbing hysterically on the dirty basement floor. She does not look at her father who is visibly suffocating under the weight of the truth. Nia Sterling, the flawless golden child raised in a world of absolute toxic entitlement, only cares about one thing. Nia completely ignores her mother's agonizing grief. She storms past Camille, stepping over her as if she were a piece of trash, and stops right in front of Josephine's wheelchair. Nia's eyes are wide with a frantic, greedy panic. "What does this mean for the trust fund?" Nia screams, her voice shrill and echoing wildly through the archive room. Preston steps up right behind her, his eyes flashing with the exact same predatory calculation. He is completely bankrupt, and this scandalous revelation is his only financial lifeline. If she is not a real Sterling, Nia continues gesturing wildly toward me with manic energy, then she is completely cut out of the inheritance right. I am the only legitimate biological heir left. We get everything right. All the properties, the liquid assets, the corporate shares. It all belongs to me now. The sheer sociopathic greed radiating from Nia is staggering. She is willing to step directly over the memory of her dead sister just to claim a larger piece of the financial pie. Beatrice stops crying. The frail, elderly nurse slowly lifts her head and looks at the pristine, arrogant young woman demanding money while her family burns to the ground. Beatrice's expression hardens, shifting from profound guilt to absolute sheer disgust. She looks Nia dead in the eye, and her frail voice suddenly carries the heavy weight of a judge delivering a lethal sentence. "You have no idea who you just stole from, do you?" Beatrice's words hung in the stale basement air like a guillotine waiting to drop. Nia crossed her arms, letting out a sharp, dismissive scoff, as if the elderly nurse was simply losing her mind. But Beatrice did not back down. Her frail, trembling hands reached deep into the pocket of her faded floral dress. She bypassed Marcus entirely. She bypassed Josephine. She stepped directly up to me and pulled out a brittle, yellowed piece of paper. It was a faded carbon copy of an original intake form from the maternity ward dated 28 years ago. I took the fragile document, holding it up to the dim fluorescent light. My eyes scanned the faded typewritten ink, searching for the truth I had bled to uncover. I read the name of the terrified young college student who had been heavily sedated and lied to. I read the name of the mother who had woken up alone and been told by Josephine Sterling that her healthy baby had been stillborn. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It started as a dark smirk and rapidly grew into a terrifying realization of absolute, unadulterated justice. I looked up at the gathered Sterling family. "You people really are doomed," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating silence of the archive room. "The woman you stole me from the terrified college student you thought you could easily discard is Valerie Dubois." The camera performs a fast, whipping pan across the faces of the villains, capturing the exact moment their arrogant world shatters into dust. Nia drops her arms, her face twisting into blank confusion as she struggles to process the magnitude of the name. Preston stumbles backward, his jaw hanging open as the financial implications strike his bankrupt reality. But it is Marcus and Josephine who react the most violently. The blood instantly drains from Marcus Sterling's face, leaving his skin the color of wet ash. Josephine grips the heavy silver handle of her cane so hard her knuckles turn completely white. Her flawless aristocratic mask melts into pure, unfiltered dread. They know exactly who Valerie Dubois is. Everyone in the global financial sector knows exactly who she is. Valerie Dubois is a legendary African-American telecom billionaire. She is a self-made titan who built a ruthless global empire from absolute scratch. She does not just acquire competitors, she annihilates them. She is notorious for dismantling corporate monopolies for breakfast and leaving billionaire dynasties completely bankrupt before lunch. She is a woman who commands absolute lethal power. And Marcus Sterling just realized that his mother stole a child from the most dangerous woman on the planet. Josephine begins to hyperventilate, her breath hitching painfully in her chest as the realization sets in. She thought she was buying a disposable replacement from a weak, helpless nobody. She thought she was preserving the Sterling bloodline by purchasing a child she considered to be common trash. Instead, she had kidnapped the firstborn heir of a vicious telecom titan. The irony was absolutely suffocating. The pristine Sterling legacy was not just going to be ruined by a public scandal, it was going to be aggressively, maliciously dismantled by a billionaire who had the unlimited capital to bury them all. I watched Marcus physically tremble. The great, imposing patriarch who had spent decades destroying his wife over a lie was now facing the total eradication of his entire existence. "You bought a child from a woman who buys governments?" Marcus White taunted, stepping toward him and waving the birth certificate in his face. "Do you have any idea what she is going to do to you? She is not going to sue you. She is going to erase you." Before Marcus could even attempt to formulate a pathetic defense, the heavy silence of the archive room was violently shattered. A piercing mechanical wail erupted from outside the hospital walls. Sirens, dozens of them, the unmistakable shriek of federal law enforcement vehicles surrounding the perimeter of the building. Harsh, flashing red and blue lights cut through the high, narrow basement windows, throwing aggressive, shifting shadows across the dusty concrete walls. The two highly paid Sterling corporate lawyers immediately backed away from Josephine's wheelchair, throwing their hands up in silent surrender. They knew a sinking ship when they saw one, and they were not going down with it. Marcus spun around, looking frantically at the heavy metal doors. Then came the sound. Heavy, synchronized footsteps echoing down the long, tiled hallway outside the archive room. It was not the chaotic sound of local police. It was the precise, tactical march of a heavily armed federal raid. The heavy boots hit the floor with rhythmic, terrifying precision, marching closer and closer to the basement doors. It was the undeniable sound of impending absolute doom. The heavy metal doors of the archive room were violently thrown open, hitting the concrete walls with a deafening crash. A dozen armed FBI agents swarmed into the room, their tactical gear bristling with authority. They moved with absolute lethal efficiency, immediately securing the exits, pinning the Sterling security guards against the filing cabinets, and forcing Arthur Harrison to his knees. Marcus raised his hands, trembling violently, as a red laser sight rested squarely on his chest. Josephine sat frozen in her wheelchair, her lifelong arrogance completely erased by sheer terror. The agents parted, forming a clear, wide path through the center of the room. Behind them stepped in Valerie Dubois, She was dressed in a razor-sharp tailored charcoal suit that radiated wealth power and absolute lethal authority. Her presence instantly sucked all the oxygen out of the room. She was a titan walking among insects. Her dark, piercing eyes swept the room, taking in the pathetic scene. She did not even glance at Marcus. She did not spare a single fraction of a second to look at Josephine Sterling. They were already dead to her. Valerie Dubois walked straight past the trembling billionaires and locked her intense gaze entirely on me. The camera pushes in close, capturing the tectonic shift in her flawless stoic facade. The terrifying, ruthless billionaire cracked. For a fraction of a second, her impenetrable armor completely melted away, revealing the profound, agonizing grief of a mother who had been robbed of her heart. She stepped right up to me, ignoring the chaos and the federal agents securing the room. She raised a trembling hand and gently touched my face, her fingers tracing my cheekbone with desperate reverence. 28 years, she whispered, her voice cracking with overwhelming emotion. I finally found you. The camera orbits us in a slow, deliberate arc shot, creating an intimate, sacred space in the middle of a war zone. For a few suspended seconds, the heavy presence of the armed federal agents, the sobbing Camille, and the terrified Sterlings completely fade away. It is just the two of us. I lean into her touch, feeling a strange, powerful warmth that I have never experienced in my entire life. Valerie Dubois, the woman who makes global markets tremble, holds my face like I am the most precious, fragile thing in the universe. Her voice is thick with unshed tears as she explains her relentless, agonizing search. She tells me she never believed the hospital doctors. She never believed the cruel, convenient lie that her baby was stillborn. She spent nearly 3 decades and millions of dollars tearing apart adoption records, bribing international officials, and tracking down every single medical professional who was on duty that night. She knew in her gut that her daughter was alive, and she promised herself she would scorch the earth until she brought me home. The intimate silence is abruptly shattered by a harsh, rattling scoff. Josephine Sterling grips the wheels of her leather chair, her face twisting into a mask of desperate, toxic defiance. She refuses to accept defeat. She glares at Valerie with sheer aristocratic hatred, desperate to maintain her crumbling illusion of absolute power. You think you have won, Josephine spits, her voice echoing harshly against the cold concrete walls. You think bringing your federal lapdogs into my hospital scares me. There is a statute of limitations on everything that happened in this basement. You cannot touch my money, Valerie. You cannot touch my legacy. I built this empire, and no amount of your newly acquired telecom wealth is going to take it away from me. Valerie slowly turns her head away from me. The warmth in her eyes instantly hardens into absolute glacial ice. She looks down at the frail, bitter old woman in the wheelchair. Her posture is razor straight, projecting the kind of lethal authority that billionaires fear. I did not bring the FBI here for your money, Josephine, Valerie states, her voice dropping to a dangerous, terrifying register. I brought them here for your freedom, but do not worry about your precious fortune. My daughter and I have already taken care of your money. Before Josephine can even begin to process the devastating weight of that threat, Preston Kensington steps forward. He smooths the lapels of his immaculate custom Italian suit, turning on his signature boyish charm. He is the golden son-in-law, the aristocratic prince who is supposed to sweep in and save the day. He flashes a diplomatic, winning smile, completely oblivious to the fact that he is stepping directly into a slaughterhouse. Ms. Dubois, let us handle this civilly, Preston says, his tone dripping with privileged condescension. There is no need for federal indictments or massive public scandals that will inevitably ruin both of our families. My family, the Kensingtons, can easily broker a deal. We can mediate a private financial settlement that satisfies everyone involved and keeps this unfortunate misunderstanding out of the press. Valerie and I do not even blink. We slowly turn our heads to look at him, and a synchronized, predatory smile spreads across both of our faces. It is the exact same terrifying expression of absolute ruin. The camera pushes in aggressively on Preston's face, capturing the exact moment his confident, diplomatic facade begins to crack. I take a slow, deliberate step toward him. Broker a deal with what money, Preston? I ask, my voice echoing like a cracking whip. The archive room goes dead silent. You want to leverage the mighty Kensington fortune to save the Sterlings. That is absolutely fascinating considering the Kensingtons have been secretly bankrupt since 2018. Nia whips her head around so fast her neck audibly pops. She stares at her husband, her eyes wide with total uncomprehending shock. Preston suddenly looks like he has swallowed crushed glass. He stammers, taking a frantic step backward, his hands waving defensively in the air. That is absurd. Preston chokes out sweat instantly beading on his forehead. You are lying. You are just trying to tear my marriage apart to hurt Nia. I reach into my tailored jacket pocket and pull out my sleek silver tablet. I tap the screen, bringing up a highly classified financial dossier, and hold it up for the entire room to see. The numbers are highlighted in glaring, aggressive red ink. I do not lie, Preston, I state flatly, refusing to let him breathe. You did not marry Nia out of love. You married her because your family's hedge fund was hemorrhaging cash and you desperately needed the sterling real estate equity to save your sinking ship. You played the perfect aristocratic prince to secure a massive financial lifeline. I turn my heavy gaze to Marcus, who is currently leaning heavily against the metal filing cabinets, looking like he is about to have a massive heart attack. You knew about it, Marcus. I demand, my voice echoing with relentless, crushing authority. You knew your golden, flawless son-in-law was totally insolvent. You took out a $100 million bridge loan last month using the flagship Sterling Commercial Properties as collateral just to quietly bail him out before the SEC caught wind of his massive fraud, didn't you? Marcus wipes a violently shaking hand across his pale, sweating face. He refuses to look at Nia, who is now hyperventilating, clutching her chest, as her perfect fairy tale marriage dissolves into a criminal transaction. It was a safe loan, Marcus stammers, his voice completely broken and pathetic. It was a temporary bridge loan to stabilize the Kensington accounts. The returns were completely guaranteed. Valerie lets out a low, chilling laugh that makes the armed federal agents stand up a little straighter. It was a safe loan, Valerie says, her dark eyes gleaming with absolute merciless victory. Until my holding company bought that exact debt yesterday afternoon, and we are calling it in. Right now. The camera executes a violent, dizzying dolly zoom directly onto the face of Marcus Sterling. The background of the dim archive room seems to stretch and distort wildly, while Marcus remains frozen in the center of the frame. The visual distortion perfectly captures the absolute sickening vertigo of a billionaire watching his entire empire vaporize in a matter of seconds. His mouth opens, but no sound comes out. His heart races, pounding against his ribs like a trapped animal. The great patriarch, the untouchable king of high society, is suffocating on his own hubris. Valerie Dubois does not raise her voice. She does not need to. Her words drop into the silence like heavy stones plunging into deep water. When you signed that bridge loan, Marcus, you put up every single asset the Sterling family owns as collateral. Valerie explains, her tone dripping with surgical precision. You offered the commercial properties, the international holdings, the liquid offshore accounts, and the ancestral estate. You were so desperate to hide your son-in-law's massive financial fraud that you signed a completely predatory contract without reading the fine print. Marcus grabs the edge of the metal filing cabinet, his legs threatening to give out completely. That loan had a morality clause. Marcus. Valerie continues stepping closer to him and forcing him to look her in the eye. A standard corporate clause that triggers an immediate default in the event of federal criminal investigations or massive fraud. The second the FBI breached the doors of this hospital, that clause was officially activated. The entire loan is now in default. The debt is due immediately and in full. And since you cannot possibly pay me $100 million in cash right this second, I am legally seizing the collateral. Josephine Sterling lets out a sharp, breathless gasp from her wheelchair, her hands flying to her pearl necklace. I own everything, Valerie declares, her voice ringing with absolute finality. I own the Sterling corporate tower. I own the high society country clubs. I own the cars, the offshore accounts, and the historic mansion you are all currently sleeping in. I even own the private jet sitting on the tarmac that you just flew in on. Every single cent of the Sterling Empire now legally belongs to my holding company. And tomorrow morning, I am transferring every single asset into an irrevocable trust entirely under the name of my daughter. You have nothing, Marcus. You are completely, utterly bankrupt. The sheer magnitude of the financial execution hits the room like a shockwave. Marcus drops to his knees, the expensive fabric of his trousers tearing against the rough concrete floor. The man who had spent 28 years acting like a god is finally brought down to the dirt where he belongs. But while Marcus is paralyzed by defeat, Nia Sterling snaps into pure frantic hysteria. The flawless golden child whose entire identity is wrapped in wealth and entitlement cannot mentally process the concept of being poor. She spins around and grabs Preston by the lapels of his custom Italian suit, shaking him violently. "Fix this!" Nia screams, her voice cracking into a shrill, desperate shriek. "Fix this right now, Preston! Call your father! Call the Kensington legal team! You promised me we were protected. You promised me we were secure. Get your family's lawyers down here and stop her from taking my money." Preston tries to pry her manic fingers off his jacket, his own face slick with a cold, terrified sweat. "Nia, stop it," Preston hisses, glancing nervously at the armed federal agents standing by the doors. "There is nothing they can do." "What do you mean there is nothing they can do?" Nia demands, her perfectly manicured nails digging painfully into his chest. "We are the Kensingtons. We have billions of dollars. Buy the debt back. Pay her off. Think about our baby Preston. I am pregnant with the next Kensington heir. You cannot let my child grow up with nothing. Do something." The mention of the baby does not soften Preston's face. Instead, it triggers a massive explosive wave of revulsion. The handsome aristocratic prince drops his diplomatic mask completely. With a sudden violent motion, Preston shoves Nia away from him. He pushes her so hard she stumbles backward, her expensive heels catching on the uneven concrete floor. "Fix it!" Preston shouts, his voice echoing wildly off the basement walls. "Broker a deal with what money, Nia? Your family is toxic, bankrupt trash." Nia catches her balance, staring at her husband in absolute horrified shock. Her breath hitches. Her hands drop to her sides. "You think the Kensingtons have billions to save you?" Preston laughs, a harsh, bitter sound that holds zero affection. "We have been completely broke since 2018. My father blew the entire family fortune on terrible investments. We are millions of dollars in debt. I did not marry you because I loved you, Nia. I married you because you were a naive, arrogant target with a massive trust fund. I married you to drain your accounts and save my own skin. But now you have absolutely nothing. You are worthless to me." Nia gasps, physically recoiling as if she has been shot in the chest. The golden child is completely shattered. The husband she worshipped, the marriage she flaunted, the baby she thought would secure her status, all of it was a calculated, predatory lie. Preston does not even spare her a second glance. He immediately turns his back on his weeping pregnant wife and falls to his knees right in front of Valerie Dubois. The great wealthy socialite reduces himself to a pathetic, groveling coward. "Miss Dubois, please," Preston begs, pressing his hands together in desperate prayer. "You do not need to destroy me. I can help you. I have the financial records. I know exactly where Marcus hid the rest of the offshore money. I know all the passwords. I will testify against him in federal court. I will give the FBI everything they need to lock Marcus and Josephine away for the rest of their lives. Just give me a personal deal. Let me walk away. I have nothing to do with these monsters. I will give you whatever you want." Valerie Dubois looks down at the groveling man with an expression of pure, lethal disgust. She tilts her head slightly, her dark eyes boring holes directly into his soul. "I do not make deals with parasites," Valerie says, her voice dropping to a terrifying, chilling whisper. "And the FBI already has the records. You have absolutely nothing to offer me, Preston. Get out of my sight before I have you arrested for wire fraud." Preston realizes he has completely run out of moves. The federal agents shift their weapons, and the sound of the tactical gear clicking makes him flinch. Without another word, without even looking back at the woman carrying his child, Preston scrambles to his feet. He shoves past the federal agents sprinting out of the archive room and bolting down the hospital hallway, fleeing like a terrified rat abandoning a sinking ship. Nia Sterling falls heavily to her knees on the dusty concrete floor. Her flawless designer dress is ruined. Her makeup runs down her face in dark, ugly streaks. She wraps her arms around her stomach, letting out a broken, agonizing sob that bounces off the cold walls. The golden child is left completely alone in the dirt. She has no husband. She has no money. She has no pride. She has absolutely nothing left. The camera drops low to the ground, capturing the dirty concrete floor in the foreground and the imposing black tactical boots of the federal agents advancing. The sheer physical presence of the FBI agents towers over the frail, crumbling figure of Josephine Sterling. The low angle emphasizes her absolute fall from grace. She is no longer a billionaire matriarch pulling the strings of a global empire. She is just a terrified, cornered criminal. She tries to jam her hand onto the control stick of her motorized wheelchair to back away, but a massive federal agent simply steps on the front wheel, locking it in place. Josephine begins to thrash and scream. Her pristine, aristocratic mask shatters into an ugly, feral panic. "How dare you touch me?" she shrieks, her voice echoing shrilly across the basement. "I am Josephine Sterling. I built this city. You work for me." The agents do not even blink. With swift, practiced efficiency, they grab her arms. Josephine lets out a blood-curdling scream as cold, heavy steel handcuffs are violently clamped around her frail, wrinkled wrists. "You cannot do this!" Josephine wails, her manicured fingers clawing uselessly against the metal restraints. "It has been 28 years. You have absolutely no jurisdiction here. The statute of limitations has expired. I know the law. I demand to speak to my attorneys." The lead FBI agent, a towering man with a face carved from granite steps directly into her line of sight. He does not show a single ounce of sympathy. He pulls a thick stack of warrants from his tactical vest and holds them up. "The kidnapping itself may be 28 years old, Mrs. Sterling," the agent states, his voice ringing with absolute crushing finality. "But the continuous financial fraud, the shell companies you used to launder, the hush money paying off medical staff, and the ongoing active concealment of a federal kidnapping make this a highly active crime. You used interstate wire transfers to hide your tracks. You engaged in a decades-long criminal conspiracy to conceal a stolen child from her biological family. There is no statute of limitations for continuous federal fraud." Josephine stares at him, her mouth opening and closing in mute horror as the true reality of her situation crashes down upon her. "You are not going to a luxury country club facility," the agent continues, leaning in close. "You are going to a maximum security federal penitentiary for the rest of your natural life." Josephine screams, thrashing wildly against the heavy metal cuffs, but her protests are completely swallowed by the vast, cold emptiness of the archive room. The agents haul the screaming matriarch out of her wheelchair, roughly dragging her toward the basement stairs. Marcus Sterling stands completely paralyzed, watching his mother being hauled away like common trash. The man who had spent his entire life demanding absolute obedience and ruling his family with an iron fist does not lift a single finger to help her. He just stares blankly ahead, a pathetic, broken ghost of a man watching his entire legacy turn to ash. As the agents drag the shrieking matriarch out of the room, the camera shifts focus to the dark corner of the archive. Camille Sterling is sitting in the thick dust of the concrete floor, rocking back and forth. Her expensive designer clothes are covered in grime. Her manicured hands are tangled in her own hair, pulling at the roots with frantic, jerky movements. She is completely destroyed. Her entire existence, the life she suffered for the abuse she endured, the guilt she carried, it was all a carefully curated lie. She had allowed her husband to brutally abuse her because she genuinely believed she deserved it. She had allowed her husband to mentally and emotionally torture the child she raised because she believed that child was the product of her own imaginary infidelity. And the most horrifying truth of all, the reality that is actively tearing her mind to shreds, is that while she was busy punishing an innocent baby, her actual biological daughter was rotting in an unfunded state orphanage. Her real baby had been suffocating in a rusted metal crib, dying alone in the dark without a mother to hold her or comfort her. Camille slowly lifts her heavy head. Her face is violently swollen, her eyes bloodshot and hollowed out by a grief so profound it borders on absolute madness. She looks past the federal agents. She looks past Valerie Dubois. She locks her shattered, desperate gaze entirely onto me. She crawls forward, dragging her ruined dress through the dirt and debris, until she is kneeling just a few feet away from where I stand. Zuri, Camille whispers, her voice a ragged, broken gasp that tears at her throat. Zuri, please. I am so sorry. I did not know. I swear to God I did not know what they did. She reaches out a trembling hand, hovering just inches from my shoes, but she is too terrified to actually touch me. I should have loved you. Camille sobs heavily, her tears splashing onto the concrete. I should have protected you. You were just an innocent baby, and I let him destroy you because I was too weak to stand up to him. I was so scared, Zuri. Please look at me. Please forgive me. Please. Camille drops her forehead to the floor, weeping with loud, agonizing heaves. I lost my real baby. I lost everything. My whole life is gone. You are the only child I have ever known. Please do not leave me here in the dark. Please just tell me you forgive me. I look down at the woman who raised me. I look at the woman who stood silently in the doorway of my bedroom while Marcus screamed at me. I look at the woman who watched me cry, who watched me bleed, who watched me break under the crushing weight of the Sterling family hatred, and never once lifted a single finger to stop it. She had 28 years to be a mother, and she chose to be a coward every single day. I feel Valerie Dubois step up close beside me. Her presence is a solid, unbreakable wall of absolute support. For the first time in my entire life, I do not feel alone. I stare into Camille's desperate, pleading eyes, and I feel absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no lingering attachment. The chain that bound me to this pathetic woman is completely broken. I look down at Camille. You chose status over being a mother. You chose a man who abused you over the child you raised. I have no pity for you. The camera slowly circles in a wide, deliberate arc before locking into position directly over my right shoulder. The tight over-the-shoulder framing creates a striking visual hierarchy. I am standing tall and completely unbothered, bathed in the harsh, cold fluorescent light, while the lens looks sharply down at the ruined, pathetic figure of Marcus Sterling. The great, imposing patriarch, the untouchable billionaire who had ruled his corporate empire and his entire family with an absolute iron fist, finally physically crumbles. The last remaining threads of his fragile arrogance snap. His legs simply give out beneath him. He drops heavily to his knees, hitting the dirty concrete floor, right beside his weeping, shattered wife. The sharp, pristine crease of his thousands of dollar-tailored trousers sinks deep into the thick gray dust. He is no longer a titan of industry. He is no longer the terrifying father figure whose footsteps used to make my heart race with anxiety. He is just a broken, weeping old man suffocating under the crushing weight of his own monstrous actions. Marcus slowly raises his heavy head. His perfectly styled hair is entirely disheveled, falling across his forehead in damp clumps. His expensive suit hangs awkwardly on his suddenly hollow frame, as if he has physically shrunk in the last 10 minutes. Heavy tears stream freely down his pale, ashen face, dripping from his clenched jaw onto his pristine silk tie. Zuri, please? Marcus begs, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine that echoes miserably off the metal filing cabinets. Please just look at me. I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry for everything. I was blind, Zuri. I was completely manipulated by my own mother. I spent 28 long years calling you an affair child. I treated you like absolute dirt because I genuinely thought you were the living, breathing proof of a betrayal that never actually happened. I punished you every single day for a crime that was entirely fabricated by Josephine. I know I was wrong. I know I was a monster to you. He reaches a trembling, sweating hand forward, as if wanting to grasp the edge of my shoe, but he lacks the courage to actually make contact. He pulls his hand back, clutching his chest. He looks up at me with desperate, bloodshot eyes, frantically searching for any lingering trace of the desperate, obedient daughter who used to crave his approval. He is hunting for a weakness he can exploit. We had good moments, Zuri, he pleads desperately, trying to weaponize tiny, fragmented memories of the past to save his own skin. Think about the summers at the lake house. Think about when I taught you how to ride a bicycle in the courtyard. I was a father to you. I raised you in my home. I clothed you. I put a roof over your head and sent you to the best schools in the world. Please, you have to remember those moments. Do not let Valerie Dubois tear away everything we had. You are a sterling. You will always be a sterling in my eyes. Please, Zuri, I am begging you on my hands and knees. Do not take the company from me. Do not destroy the Sterling Empire. It is my entire life. It is everything I have ever built. I will give you a permanent seat on the board of directors. I will publicly name you as my only legitimate heir. I will give you whatever you want. Just please leave me my company. I stand perfectly still. I do not blink. I do not flinch. I do not feel a single ounce of empathy for the pathetic, weeping man kneeling in the dirt at my feet. For 28 years, my entire existence was defined by a desperate, agonizing need to make this man love me. I had twisted myself into knots, trying to be perfect, trying to earn a single scrap of affection from a man who looked at me with pure disgust. But looking at him now, groveling and crying over his precious corporate shares, the absolute emotional detachment I feel is the most liberating sensation I have ever experienced. The heavy, suffocating chain that tied me to this family is completely broken. You did not build anything, Marcus. I state, my voice echoing with a cold, flat finality that leaves absolutely no room for debate. You inherited a bloody legacy, and you maintained it with pure cruelty. You did not create a business empire, you just managed a slaughterhouse. You spent my entire life breaking me down emotionally, suffocating me, and punishing me for a sin that was actually committed by your own mother. You let your massive, fragile ego blind you to the fact that Josephine was the real monster sitting right beside you. You destroyed an innocent wife, and you tortured an innocent child because you were too weak and too cowardly to ever question the woman who was actually pulling your strings. Marcus chokes on a loud, desperate sob, shaking his head frantically as if he can physically reject the reality of my words. He opens his mouth to beg again, to offer more empty corporate titles and hollow apologies to a daughter who is completely immune to his manipulation. I do not let him speak. I turn my head slightly and give a brief, sharp nod to the armed federal agents standing by the heavy metal doors. The lead agent immediately steps forward, his heavy boots thudding against the concrete. He grabs Marcus by the shoulder and hauls the weeping billionaire roughly to his feet. Marcus thrashes weakly, protesting and sobbing as the cold, heavy steel handcuffs are pulled from the agent's tactical vest. I step right into Marcus Sterling's personal space, forcing him to look directly into his worst nightmare as his wrists are locked tightly behind his back. The metal clicks with a sharp, terrifying finality echoing through the archive room. You lost your real daughter, I say, my words dropping like a lethal physical blow. You lost your mother to a federal prison cell. And as of 10 minutes ago, I completely liquidated your company. The board is gone, the assets are sold, the Sterling Empire no longer exists. Enjoy the ashes. The heavy silence following my decree is shattered by a ragged, frantic wheezing. The camera pans sharply away from Marcus and drops to the floor, capturing Nia Sterling in the throes of a massive, full-blown panic attack. The golden child is hyperventilating, her chest heaving violently under the ruined silk of her maternity dress. The meticulously constructed fantasy she has lived in since birth has just been detonated. Preston is gone. The Kensington name is a bankrupt joke. Her trust fund has evaporated. The Sterling Empire has been liquidated. For a moment, she just stares at her hands, trembling uncontrollably, as if expecting her platinum credit cards to magically materialize. When they do not, she snaps. She completely loses whatever shred of aristocratic dignity she has left. Nia drops onto her hands and knees and begins to crawl. The sight is deeply pathetic. The woman who spent her entire life sneering at the working class who hosted charity galas strictly to mock the poor is now dragging herself across the filthy concrete floor of a hospital basement. Dust and grime coat her expensive knees. Her perfectly styled hair is plastered to her face with sweat and tears. She scrambles toward me, leaving a smeared trail of ruined makeup and broken pride in her wake. "Zuri, please." Nia gasps, her voice a wet guttural sob. She reaches me, and her manicured fingers claw desperately at the ankles of my custom leather heels. She clings to my shoes like a drowning woman clinging to a life raft. "You cannot do this to me." Nia weeps, staring up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "I am your sister Zuri. We grew up together. We shared a home. You cannot just leave me with nothing. I am pregnant. I have a baby coming. How am I supposed to pay for the hospital? How am I supposed to buy a house? I do not know how to do any of that." Her grip tightens on my shoes, her knuckles turning white. She is bargaining, throwing away decades of cruelty in exchange for a single drop of mercy. "I can work for you, Naya," begs, the words spilling out of her mouth in a pathetic, frantic rush. "Give me a job at your new company, or just a small allowance, a tiny trust fund. Anything, Zuri. I will do whatever you want. I will apologize to the press. I will clean your floors. You just have to give me something to live on. Please. You have all the money now. You have billions. You will not even notice a few million missing. Just give me enough to survive." I look down at her. I study her tear-streaked face, her trembling lips, her desperate clawing hands. I search my heart for any lingering trace of sisterly affection, for the bond that society dictates we are supposed to share. There is absolutely nothing there. The space where my love for her should be has been thoroughly burned out by 28 years of her relentless targeted abuse. I remember the time she deliberately spilled red wine on my only decent dress, right before my college interview, laughing as I scrubbed frantically at the stain in the bathroom. I remember her standing behind our father, nodding in smug agreement every time he called me a worthless mistake. I remember her telling her country club friends that I was just the hired help trying to steal the family fortune. I slowly and deliberately pull my foot backward, breaking her desperate grip. Nia gasps, her hands falling empty onto the cold concrete. "You used to tell me I did not belong at the table." I state, my voice perfectly level, carrying none of the emotion she so desperately wants to see. "You spent your entire life reminding me that I was an outsider, a mistake, a parasite feeding off the great Sterling legacy. You made sure I knew my place. Well, this is reality, Nia. Now you do not even have a chair." Nia stares up at me, her mouth hanging open, her chest heaving as the absolute finality of my words strikes her down. "You want a job?" I ask, tilting my head slightly. "Learn to code, Nia. Update your resume. Stand in line at a temp agency like the rest of the world. Or better yet, go find your runaway husband. Maybe the two of you can share a studio apartment and reminisce about the days when you used to matter." Nia recoils, burying her face in her hands and letting out a high-pitched, agonizing wail of pure despair. She curls into a tight ball on the floor, mourning the only thing she ever truly loved, her bank account. I do not look at her anymore. The transaction is complete. The debt is settled. Beside me, I feel a sudden warm presence. Valerie Dubois steps up to my side, closing the gap between us. She does not say a word to the weeping woman on the floor. She simply wraps a firm, protective, and fiercely maternal arm around my shoulders. The gesture is effortless and absolute. I lean into her embrace, feeling a profound, unshakable security that I have never known in my entire life. The visual contrast in the room is stark and undeniable. On the floor, the remnants of the Sterling family are scattered in the dirt, a ruined dynasty built on lies, kidnapping, and cruelty, completely shattered by their own toxic hubris. Above them, Valerie and I stand perfectly united, projecting an aura of quiet, lethal power. The self-made titan and the daughter she scorched the earth to find. We are untouched by their misery. The lead FBI agent signals his team. It is time to go. The agents step forward, grabbing the handles of Josephine Sterling's wheelchair. The frail, vicious matriarch begins to scream anew, thrashing wildly against her heavy steel handcuffs as they forcibly wheel her toward the heavy metal doors. Her shrill curses echo down the hospital corridor, fading into the distance as she is rolled away toward a federal prison cell where she will spend the rest of her miserable life. Two more agents haul Marcus Sterling up by his armpits. The disgraced billionaire does not fight them. He is a hollow shell, a ghost of a man stripped of his titles, his wealth, and his arrogance. He drags his feet shuffling out of the archive room without looking back, leaving his weeping wife and his devastated golden child abandoned on the dusty floor. Camille continues to rock back and forth, muttering fragmented apologies to a baby she never truly loved, while Nia hyperventilates beside her, clutching her empty hands to her chest. Valerie gently guides me toward the exit, her arms still wrapped tightly around my shoulders. We step out of the dim archive room, leaving the sobbing remnants of my former abusers behind in the dark. The heavy metal door swings shut behind us, cutting off their cries completely. The Empire is officially dead. The heavy metal door slams shut, and the echoing thud vibrates through the floorboards. The hysterical shrieks of Nia, the pathetic whimpering of Camille, and the defeated groans of Marcus are instantly muted, reduced to pathetic muffled squeaks behind 3 inches of reinforced steel. The camera tracks backwards smoothly, retreating down the long, sterile hospital corridor, keeping Valerie and me perfectly centered in the frame. The transition is profoundly physical. For 28 years, my entire nervous system has been locked in a permanent state of fight or flight, braced for the next insult, the next backhanded compliment, the next emotional blow from the people who claim to be my family. Now, as we walk away from the wreckage, the suffocating atmospheric pressure of the Sterling legacy simply evaporates. The air in the hallway feels suddenly lighter, crisper. The harsh fluorescent hospital lights glint off the polished linoleum floor, illuminating our path forward. The synchronized click of our heels creates a steady, powerful rhythm, breaking the absolute quiet of the corridor. It is not an empty silence. It is a heavy, victorious quiet. The chaos of the archive room, the frantic begging, and the violent unraveling of a billionaire dynasty has been entirely left behind in the dark. We do not look back. Every single step we take away from that basement is a deliberate, absolute severing of my past. I can practically feel the invisible toxic strings that Marcus and Josephine spent decades wrapping around my throat, snapping one by one. I am shedding the identity of the unwanted scapegoat. I am leaving the damaged, anxious girl who desperately craved their validation dead on the concrete floor right next to them. I stand taller, rolling my shoulders back, breathing in the clean, sterile air of the hospital corridor. Valerie Dubois does not coddle me. As we walk, she turns her head slightly to look at me, and there is no pity in her dark eyes. There is no patronizing sorrow for the trauma I just endured. She does not reach out to stroke my hair or offer empty, soothing platitudes like a traditional mother might offer a wounded child. Instead, I see a fierce, gleaming pride. She is looking at me the way an apex predator looks at its offspring after a flawless hunt. She sees a shark. She sees a woman who just stood in the center of a room and surgically dismantled a global empire without raising her voice or shedding a single tear. "You handled that beautifully," Valerie says, her voice resonating with deep, genuine respect. The words echo slightly in the empty corridor. "You did not just bankrupt them, Zuri. You broke their mythology. You let them watch the exact moment their entire reality collapsed, and you did not flinch. You did not give them a single inch of mercy to cling to. That requires a very specific, highly refined kind of ruthlessness. It is a trait that cannot be taught in boardrooms or bought with trust funds. It is in your blood." I absorb her words, letting them settle deep into my chest. For my entire life, the concept of a mother was associated with coldness, rejection, and the agonizing need to shrink myself to be loved. Camille demanded weakness. Camille demanded that I be a quiet, invisible punching bag to absorb the collateral damage of her own miserable choices. Valerie demands strength. Valerie looks at my sharp edges and does not ask me to dull them. She recognizes the monster the Sterlings created, and she is wildly proud of it. I turn my head to look at the woman who tore the earth apart to find me, who spent nearly 3 decades building a telecommunications empire just to have the capital required to scorch the earth on my behalf. The rigid defensive posture I have carried since childhood finally softens. A real smile, a genuine warm expression that reaches all the way to my eyes spreads across my face. It feels entirely new, like a muscle I have never actually used before. I had a good teacher, I say, my voice steady and clear, ringing with absolute certainty, even if I just met her. Valerie smiles back, and it is a breathtaking sight. The glacial, terrifying mask of the billionaire CEO melts away, leaving only the radiant joy of a mother who has finally recovered her missing piece. We reach the end of the corridor. The hospital lobby is completely empty, the federal agents having effectively cleared the perimeter to ensure our private exit. The automatic glass doors slide open with a soft mechanical hiss. We step out together, crossing the threshold and leaving the sterile, artificial air of the building behind. The midday sun is blindingly bright. The golden light washes over us, hot and absolute, burning away the last lingering shadows of the Sterling basement. The warmth on my skin feels like a baptism. I take a deep breath of the outside air, filling my lungs with the pure, unadulterated taste of absolute freedom. The world looks different. The colors are sharper, the sky is wider, and the horizon feels utterly limitless. Waiting for us at the curb is a sleek, immaculate black Maybach, its tinted windows gleaming like obsidian in the sunlight. A sharply dressed driver immediately steps forward, his posture rigidly professional. He opens the heavy rear door with practiced deference, bowing his head slightly as we approach. The plush leather interior of the luxury vehicle promises a completely new world, a life built on truth, immense power, and unshakable loyalty. Valerie steps toward the open door but pauses, waiting for me to take the lead. I step up to the pristine vehicle, resting my hand on the polished metal frame. The engine hums quietly, a low vibration of pure, dormant power ready to be unleashed. But before I slide into the back seat to begin my new life as a Dubois, I stop. I slowly turn my head, looking over my shoulder. I look past the driver, past the hospital entrance, past the ghost of the miserable, suffocating life I just burned to the ground. I look directly into the camera. My expression is perfectly calm, utterly ruthless, and completely victorious. I hold the gaze for a long, suspended moment, letting the absolute finality of my triumph register, before the screen abruptly cuts to black. The screen snaps back to reality, plunging us instantly into the hyper-insulated quiet of the Maybach's cabin. The heavy doors have sealed completely, locking out the noise, the heat, and the frantic energy of the city streets. Inside, it smells of rich, immaculate leather and ozone. The suspension is so flawless that we do not feel the road beneath us at all. We are simply gliding through the financial district like a phantom ship navigating through lesser vessels. The tinted windows cast a cool, shadowy filter over the world outside, turning the bustling pedestrians and gridlocked traffic into a silent, muted movie. I sink back into the plush seat, feeling the residual adrenaline slowly drain from my muscles to be replaced by a profound, absolute clarity. Valerie sits beside me, completely composed. She does not reach for my hand to offer unwarranted comfort. She does not ask me how I am feeling or subject me to any forced emotional postmortems about the family I just annihilated. We are far past the need for mundane pleasantries. Instead, she opens a sleek silver compartment between our seats, retrieves a pristine tablet, and taps the screen alive. The cool blue light illuminates her sharp features. The liquidation of the Sterling assets creates an interesting vacuum in the sector. Valerie states, her voice carrying the crisp, authoritative cadence of a boardroom general. You effectively dismantled their supply chain, but the demand remains untouched. My telecommunications infrastructure can absorb their remaining market share within the quarter, but we need a seamless integration. I turn my head, looking at the woman who gave me life. We have known each other for a fraction of a day, yet we are speaking the exact same language. There is no sentimentality here, only strategy. I retained the proprietary algorithms from my own tech divisions before the Sterling collapse. I reply, matching her clinical tone. They thought I was just managing their portfolios, but I built a shadow network. If we integrate my predictive analytics into your global communication grid, we do not just absorb their market share, we completely redefine the sector. We can render their former competitors obsolete by the end of the fiscal year. Valerie looks at me, and that fierce, gleaming pride returns to her dark eyes. She nods slowly, tapping a rapid sequence of commands into her tablet. "Consider it done," she says. "We will restructure the holding companies by tomorrow morning. You and I are going to build a monolith Zuri, something that cannot be stolen, inherited by default, or corrupted by weak men." We sit in a comfortable, charged silence as the Maybach weaves effortlessly through the concrete canyons of the city. The business is settled. The future is mapped out with lethal precision. But as we ride, Valerie turns off the tablet and rests it on her lap. Her posture softens just a fraction, and she turns her gaze toward the window, watching the towering buildings slide past. "There is one final piece of business regarding the Sterlings," she says, her tone shifting from corporate strategy to something quieter but equally absolute, a matter of basic dignity that they completely ignored. I look at her, giving her my full attention. "When my investigators tore through Josephine Sterling's history to find you, they uncovered the details of her original crime," Valerie explains. "They tracked exactly what she did that night at the clinic 28 years ago. She bribed the attending physician to swap you with Camille's actual child. But the real horror was how she disposed of the evidence." Valerie meets my eyes, and the sheer coldness of Josephine Sterling's malice hangs in the air between us. Camille's biological baby, the infant who died shortly after birth, was treated like medical waste, Valerie states, her voice tight with a cold, controlled fury. Josephine paid a fixer to have the child logged under a false name and buried in an unmarked state grave on the edge of the city. She erased the child's existence entirely, just to secure Marcus a healthy heir and protect her grip on the family fortune. A heavy silence fills the car. I picture Camille rocking back and forth in the hospital basement, clutching her empty chest, completely oblivious to the fact that her real child was thrown away, like garbage, by her own mother-in-law. I dispatched my legal team and a private recovery unit early this morning. Valerie continues, her gaze unwavering. "We petitioned the state, fast-tracked the permits, and secured the exhumation orders. The child is being moved today. I purchased a private plot in the most beautiful, serene cemetery in the valley. The baby will have a proper marble headstone, a real name, a peaceful resting place." I stare at Valerie, completely stunned by the magnitude of the gesture. She had absolutely no obligation to that child. The baby belonged to the woman who raised me with cold indifference to the family that kept me hostage. Yet Valerie used her immense wealth and influence to deliver a final act of profound grace. She did it because it was right. She did it to restore order to a universe that Josephine Sterling had twisted into a nightmare. "Thank you," I whisper the words, feeling inadequate, but carrying the full weight of my gratitude. Valerie gives a single sharp nod, acknowledging the sentiment, without letting the moment dissolve into melodrama. "We restore what we can," she says simply, "and we destroy what we must." I look down at my hands resting in my lap. I pull my phone from my designer blazer pocket. The screen glows brightly in the dim cabin. I unlock it and open my contacts list. I scroll down past my attorneys, my wealth managers, and my secure corporate lines. I stop when I reach the name: Marcus Sterling. For nearly 3 decades, that name on a screen meant an instant spike of anxiety. It meant a demand for perfection, a brutal critique, or a summons to be belittled. I stare at the digital letters, feeling absolutely nothing. The fear is entirely gone. The desperate craving for his approval has been completely burned away. He is just a broken old man sitting in a federal interrogation room, wondering how he lost the universe. I press the edit button. A red delete option appears next to his name. I do not hesitate. I tap the screen. A prompt asks me to confirm the deletion. I press confirm. The name vanishes. The contact is permanently erased. The toxicity is systematically purged from the hard drive of my life. I lock the screen and drop the phone back into my pocket, feeling physically lighter, as if a lead weight has been surgically removed from my chest. The Maybach smoothly decelerates, gliding to a flawless halt. "We have arrived," Valerie announces. I look out the tinted window. We are parked at the base of a staggering architectural marvel. A towering skyscraper of dark glass and brushed steel, piercing the clouds like a spear. It is the absolute pinnacle of corporate dominance, the global headquarters of Valerie Dubois Enterprise. But as I look up toward the very top of the magnificent structure, something catches my eye. A massive wrap-around digital billboard crowns the building. The high-definition screens are currently glitching, shifting through a brilliant display of corporate rebranding. The old logos are dissolving, fracturing into a million pixels of light. The system is recalculating, processing the massive merger we just finalized in the backseat of the car. New letters begin to form, spanning hundreds of feet across the skyline, bright and undeniable against the afternoon sun. I stare up at the shifting digital lights, waiting for the new name of our empire to lock into place. We walk out of the heavy hospital doors together, stepping out of the sterile artificial light and into the bright, blinding midday sun. A sleek, immaculate black Maybach is waiting for us, idling quietly at the curb. The driver immediately steps forward, opening the heavy armored door with practiced deference. Valerie and I slide into the plush leather interior, and the heavy door slams shut, sealing us inside a hyper-insulated sanctuary of quiet power. The suspension is so flawless that we barely feel the road as the luxury car pulls away from the hospital entrance, leaving the screaming, shattered remnants of the Sterling family far behind us. Inside the cabin, there is no forced sentimentality. There are no tearful hugs or dramatic emotional breakdowns. We are two incredibly powerful women calculating our next devastating move. Valerie taps a sleek tablet resting on her lap, bringing up global market projections. We discuss the aggressive merger of my shadow networks with her global telecommunications grid. We talk about stripping the Sterling assets down to their bare foundations and absorbing their market share by the end of the fiscal quarter. We speak the exact same language, a dialect of absolute ruthless efficiency. As the Maybach glides smoothly through the dense city traffic, Valerie turns off her tablet. Her perfectly rigid posture softens just a fraction. "There is one final piece of business regarding the Sterlings," she says, her tone shifting from corporate strategy to something quieter, but equally absolute. A matter of basic dignity that they completely ignored. "My investigators found the clinic records from 28 years ago. I have already arranged to have Camille, real baby, exhumed from the unmarked state grave Josephine dumped him in. The child is being moved to a beautiful private resting place in the valley today. He will have a proper marble headstone and a real name." I stare at Valerie, completely stunned by the magnitude of the gesture. She had absolutely no obligation to that child. Yet she used her immense wealth and influence to deliver a final act of profound grace that the Sterlings never deserved, but the innocent child absolutely did. "Thank you," I whisper, feeling the full heavy weight of her kindness. Valerie simply nods. I look down at my hands. I pull my phone from my tailored blazer pocket. I unlock the screen and open my contacts list, scrolling past my attorneys and wealth managers until I reach the name Marcus Sterling. For nearly 3 decades, that name meant an instant spike of anxiety and fear. I stare at the digital letters, feeling absolutely nothing. I press edit. I tap delete. I watch the contact completely vanish from the screen, symbolizing the absolute permanent erasure of his toxicity from my life. I lock the phone and drop it back into my pocket, feeling physically lighter. The Maybach decelerates smoothly, gliding to a flawless halt. I look out the tinted window. We are parked at the base of a staggering architectural marvel, a towering glass skyscraper piercing the clouds like a spear, the global headquarters of Valerie's enterprise. High above the busy street, a massive wrap-around digital billboard crowns the building. The high-definition screens are currently glitching, shifting through a brilliant display of corporate rebranding. The massive pixels shift from deep corporate blue into a striking razor-sharp platinum. The letters snap into their final formation. Dubois and Sterling Crisis Management. The driver steps back, holding the door open. I slide out into the vibrant, thumping pulse of the financial district. The camera dynamically detaches from its static position inside the luxury vehicle. It sweeps down, catching the sharp, deadly point of my designer stiletto as it strikes the pavement before swooping into a fluid, low-angle Steadicam shot. The lens circles me deliberately, capturing the sheer monumental scale of the glass skyscraper towering at my back. The building reflects the late afternoon sun like a colossal modern beacon. The camera continues its smooth orbital glide, framing me perfectly against the massive digital billboard. I am no longer the cowering, anxious girl shrinking in the opulent, suffocating corridors of the Sterling estate. I stand with my shoulders squared, my spine perfectly straight, my chin tilted upward. The meticulously tailored lines of my dark suit cut a striking, imposing silhouette. The wind catches the edge of my jacket, but I remain entirely unmoving. The circling camera finally slows, coming to a dead steady stop directly in front of me. The framing is incredibly tight, intimate, and overwhelmingly powerful. I look straight forward, piercing the invisible barrier of the lens. I look directly at the audience. My posture is entirely relaxed, but the energy I project is completely lethal. There is no anger left in my eyes. All that remains in my gaze is the absolute sub-zero temperature of a woman who has successfully excised a massive malignant tumor from her life and survived the operation without a single scratch. I hold the unblinking gaze for a long, silent moment. When I speak, my voice is low, resonant, and completely stripped of any hesitation. They spent 28 years trying to make me feel like I was the dirt on their shoes. I take a single, slow, deliberate step toward the lens. They thought bloodlines and old money made them untouchable. But here is the reality. Toxic families will burn down their own house just to complain about the smoke. I pause, letting the sharp, undeniable truth of the words settle into the crisp air. The reflection of the towering building catches in my eyes. If they tell you that you do not belong in their family, believe them. A small, razor-thin smile touches the corner of my mouth. Because chances are you were always meant to rule an empire of your own. I reach into the breast pocket of my tailored blazer and smoothly pull out a pair of dark, oversized sunglasses. With a practiced, effortless motion, I slide them onto my face, instantly shielding my eyes. I turn sharply on my heel. Valerie Dubois is waiting for me at the entrance, her presence a commanding anchor of genuine power. She gives me a single, deeply approving nod. We do not look back at the busy street. We walk forward together in perfect synchronization. The massive glass doors part seamlessly, granting us entry into the soaring marble atrium of our shared future. We cross the threshold, stepping completely into the cool, absolute authority of the building. The camera holds steady on the closing glass doors for a fraction of a second before the screen abruptly cuts to pitch black. A heavy, incredibly deep bass line drops instantly, shaking the speakers as a triumphant, upbeat R&B track floods the darkness.